let's now go to Britain's second city, as it likes to call itself. That's Manchester. Lovely place, lots of character, and lots of cycle lanes as well. It turns out that the powers that be, for now at least, think that it's good to try to force you out of your powered vehicle onto a bicycle. In other words, doing exactly the opposite that China is doing. As it pulls itself up to a higher standard of living, we're trying to pull ourselves down to a lower one. What's all this about? And what damage might this be doing to the economics of Manchester? Joining me now is a man who would be mayor, Nick Buckley, MBE, which means something of the British Empire. Is it member? What's it stand for, Nick? Member of the British Empire. Member. Yeah, I'm Lembertopic FRAS, which is Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Association Society, which isn't quite the same, but it sounds good. The letters sound good after my name because most people don't ask what they stand for. Thanks for joining us. You're standing as an independent in the mayoral election in Manchester. Before we get to the specific here, why are you standing for that job?
I've had enough. I've had enough of watching my country slowly deteriorate, and it's been going on for decades and decades. This isn't down to one person or one political party. And I decided that I can either watch it all crumble away, or I can try and do something about it. And I may fail, but if that then gives someone else courage to stand up and try to fix the country, then I'll take that as a win.
Don't plan for failure yet. I was Northern Irish Estonian standing for a local authority in Newcastle, and I got elected. So it's still possible. But maybe people won't be able to get to the polling stations because of all these cycle lanes. Tell us your beef about bikes.
Oh, I don't know if you've ever been to the north of England. I don't know if you've ever been to Manchester. We call it the rainy city. Never stops raining. Nobody I know uses a bike for transport. I know people use bike for pleasure and entertainment, but everywhere over the last 5 years, everywhere you go, the roads are closed down because they're building a new cycle lane. We've even got one of the main trunk roads going into Manchester city centre called Chester Road. Half of that is a cycle lane now. So the council just put cones along the road one day 3 years ago and said, this is a cycle lane. I've stood there for like 40 minutes, saw one cyclist. It's half a dual carriageway.
Why have they done it? Is it just virtue signalling? That's certainly the reason I think it's happened in London.
It's several things. It's virtue signalling. It's people believing this green lunacy nonsense of climate change climate change is real, but it's got nothing to do with man. It's a natural cycle of the planet. And also, when you can't fix proper problems, like our kids stabbing each other to death, when you can't solve those types of problems, you've got to look like you're solving something. So let's build some cycle lanes. At least I can say, look what I've done. I can't save your kid's life, but I can save the planet. How wonderful am I?
I've been to Manchester many times. When I was a member of Parliament in Wales, I used to prefer Manchester as the big conurbation to go to. Birmingham was a hassle, and Cardiff was impossible to drive around. It's even worse now. So I used to go to Manchester a lot. Now I used to find the traffic fairly free-flowing. As you say, it is marked by an absence of clement weather. And I don't get why they're spending millions and millions of pounds, not on a neutral thing. It's actually bound to be increasing congestion. Even for the climate fanatics, how can it make sense? Or do they think that by making it almost impossible to drive around, everyone's going to take the old-fashioned Chinese way of going around, and you'll end up with 5 million cycles in Manchester or something like that?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. This is all about driving people out of their cars and onto public transport and bicycles. The mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has just taken over the buses. So he's just franchised our bus service in Greater Manchester. And what people don't realise, he's only got something like 3 years to increase passenger numbers by 30%. Otherwise, the project goes bankrupt. So this is all part of the agenda to get us out of our cars, to get us onto buses and trams. And this has been going on for decades. And the people at the top of this really do believe this eco-green lunacy, and they are trying to save the planet. And to save the planet, they've got to push us back to the Stone Age. They've got to take away our freedoms. They've got to take away our choice. and they've got to tell us what to do, how to live, how to travel.
Stay with us. We're going to come back to Nick. Some of your comments here on the TNT Radio.live chat. Peter Folder says, we need more independence. Well done for standing. So you've got one vote there, though I'm not sure where he lives, Nick. So maybe it's one vote by proxy there. Drumstick says, it's refreshing to hear someone against bikes. Nick shouldn't come to Copenhagen. Half of us bike to and from school and work because driving a car downtown is a nightmare. I have tried it. John takes a more conciliatory attitude towards bicycles, saying there does need to be better cycling infrastructure because most car journeys could easily be replaced by cycling. And car drivers drive very dangerously around cyclists too. The design is being done, though, seemingly to cause animosity and problems. There needs to be a balance. I would say to you, John, I studied this some years ago, and when we were in that ridiculous lockdown, driving went down by about a fifth, cycling went up by about 40%, and so did cycling deaths. That means cycling deaths are directly proportional, not to other traffic, but to cycling. But I'll come back to that on another occasion. And last one, Mazzy says, yeah, we're irresponsible. Besides, we can't be trusted. And that's about a slightly different subject, but I think this could also be put here. Nick, essentially, the message of cycle lanes are that we're too stupid to coexist on main streets, and therefore we can cost the commuter millions of hours a year in order to put these cycle lanes in, which are barely used.
Exactly. Can I give you two real life examples of why this doesn't work? The first example is, let's look at finances. So the dual carriageway I talked about a minute ago, half of it now is coned off for cyclists. That isn't used. It came out a couple of weeks ago in the Manchester Evening News that the council hired the cones to do that. They could have bought the cones for something like £20,000-30,000, but got a company in and hired the cones. And at the moment, they build something like £250,000. So there's £250,000 that council could have used on proper services to improve people's lives in the area of Trafford, but they wasted it hiring cones. So there's a financial example. But a real life example is a little town in Rochdale called Castleton. And the council have just spent a year putting in a cycle lane on the high street, which has reduced the intake, financial intake of the shops by something like 50%. And before Christmas, I spoke to the local baker on that street, and his family have been making bread in that shop for 96 years. He was looking forward to his centenary, about when he was going to celebrate what his grandfather did opening that shop, making bread for local people. He went bankrupt just before Christmas and shut the shop down. And he said it's directly related to the whole year of them building a cycle lane outside my shop, getting rid of the on-street parking and and upsetting customers walking past my shop because they can't. He's gone bankrupt. There's nearly a family business 100 years old bankrupt now.
I understand that motivation. I've got an electric bicycle. I enjoy using it, but when it's dry and it's warm, I'm 59 years old. I will use it to go to the local shops, but I'm not dreaming of using it to take my kids to school. I'm not going to get a trailer for my children, and I'm not going to use it in the rain. And when I'm 70, I'm very unlikely to be traveling any significant distance on a bicycle. How did we get to a situation when a first world country aspires to replace its first world transport with second world options, which are only used in the second world because they can't afford to use cars?
This is a first world problem. It's called virtue signalling. It's our political leaders, our so-called elite, who don't cycle themselves, by the way. They have chauffeur-driven cars, and and they've got private jets. They don't use these transports, but what they're doing is they're trying to dangle some shiny keys, going, look here, look what I'm doing about saving the world. Don't look at all the rubbish policies I'm introducing. Don't look at the fact I can't make your life better. And it's just the newest version of virtue signalling, so we think they're doing something important. And some of them would have bought into this green agenda nonsense. But I'll tell you now, Greater Manchester hasn't bought into this. Most of the people I meet think this is a load of rubbish, a waste of time, a waste of money. And they're just blaming every politician I meet. That's why I'm standing as independent, because this is a political problem and politicians get the blame for everything, and rightly so.
We're going to talk to Howard Cox, who's Reform UK candidate in London in a few minutes' time, about the same subject. I want to get his take on why this infection, this disease is spreading across our roads, where, of course, cyclists don't even pay any tax for all the things that they're being given. Just before you go, though, you have a charity called Mancunian Way. Tell us about that.
I'm not really involved in the charity anymore. I set it up 10, 15 years ago. It's working on, it still does amazing work, by the way. It works on the streets in Greater Manchester, working with kids on the streets, stopping them getting involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. So we've saved hundreds of kids getting involved in organised crime. We've saved 15 girls and one boy from being sexually abused and raped. It's really a hard hitting charity, and it's multi-award winning now.
So in that context, what do you think about the idea that the Conservatives are talking about criminalising homelessness, rough sleeping?
Well, it's already criminalised under the 1823 Vacancy Act. We do need some legislation to help us tackle rough sleeping, but legislation by itself won't do anything. And like every government, especially a dying government at the moment, they're just looking for headlines. They're just grasping at anything to save a couple of seats. And from what I've read at the moment, it's a stupid piece of legislation. If you want to get people off the streets, which I've done, and my charity also used to have a homeless arm to it as well, to get people off the streets, you've got to provide emergency accommodation so you can get them off the streets that minute you speak to them, not I can try to get you off in 4 weeks from now. You've got to make living on the streets uncomfortable, believe me, it isn't as comfortable as you think it is. So we've got to stop begging, we've got to stop people handing out food, and we've got to get people off the streets. And the people who don't go off the streets then, when accommodation is available, we've got to look at mental health acts and legislation, because they're mentally ill. It's not about criminalising people. That doesn't work. Our prisons are full, our court system's full. There's a way of doing this, but it takes some common sense and it takes a backbone. But nobody wants to do the hard work to end up sleeping.
It's interesting that any politician could suggest that if you're homeless and living rough in the street, your circumstances and society's circumstances can be helped by giving you a criminal record on top. Beautiful. Really love it. Those people
Silly.
haven't really got a sense of reality, have they?
Yeah. So we're going to fine people for being on the streets. So what do they have to do then? They have to beg more to get more money to pay the fine, or we end up taking them to prison, to the courts, where we should be getting rapists and murderers in courts easier and quicker, not someone sat on a street corner begging, or someone who won't go into accommodation. I mean, we do need to fix this problem. It's a very serious problem, because at the end of this problem are dead citizens lying in entries covered in excrement and rats who are dying in our cities. So it's an extremely important issue to fix. But what they're trying to do is absolutely rubbish. I mean, I advised Boris Johnson on this a couple of years ago when he was PM, but then he got kicked out. I'm not sure he'd have done anything about it anyway, but there's a way to solve this quite easily. It's just not the way they're trying to go about it.
Except presumably in Manchester, the answer is on your bike on one of these wonderful empty cycle lanes. Nick, thanks. I'd like to get you onto my weekend show here on TNT so we can explore some of these concepts more deeply, partly because it's interesting you being a candidate, but also largely because you seem to have your finger on the pulse of society in a way which I personally relate to. Nick Buckley, thanks so much for joining us. That's Nick Buckley, MB, standing as an independent candidate.
If you like that video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell and comment. And if you like what I'm saying about running for Mayor of Greater Manchester, then stick around. Tell your family, tell your friends. The only way I'm going to have a chance of winning is a grassroots movement. So be part of that movement and hit that bell. Thanks.